Hello there. I am Daniel Tostado here to talk about the breaking news of the new guideline that the French government has put out regarding international teleworking on the long stay visitor visa. As an immigration lawyer here in France, this has been like one of the most important questions for years now. Can we go ahead and do this? This decision is a guideline. It's not a law, not a regulation, not an arrêté, circulaire. It's basically a reply from the Ministry of the Interior to a question put to them by a member of the Assemblée Nationale to clarify policy. In the text of the question that the deputy poses to the government, it says, listen, we're seeing this email that came through in June 2025 to The Local, which is the great online news source for the expat immigrant community here in France about what's impacting us. The Ministry of Finance said, no, you cannot telework on this visitor visa. And that was contradicting years of confirmation from the French consulates around the globe saying, yes, you can. I emailed the French consulate shortly thereafter and they said, no, our policy hasn't changed. So I was seeing this real tension in the French government. So what does it say? There's 5 lines in this text, so it's relatively short, but I find it to be quite clear and relatively unambiguous in what it says. The first thing that it says is, listen, there is no law on the books that says you can telework or a law that says you cannot telework on this visitor visa. And so in the absence of a law, this guideline is now stepping into that void to answer this question. The next line says, what is work? France has never defined what work is, and that kind of bothers me, because I've wanted France to define work for a while. Because once we define what work is, then we can be clear about when a person signs onto the visitor visa, they have to sign a one-sentence declaration, I hereby engage to not exercise any professional activity in France. What does that mean? Does it mean no activity whatsoever? Does it mean no activity in France? The consulates and the prefectures and the Ministry of the Interior have said for years, yeah, no, it's the in France part that we care about. We don't really care about regulating foreign activity. What difference does it make to France? France has a high unemployment. We want people to be active on the French labor market. But if you're coming on the visitor visa, you're not going to take a French job. You're going to shop at Monoprix without taking a job at Monoprix. You're going to buy more goods and services. That's going to allow the French companies to hire more. That's going to drive down French unemployment. So it's kind of win-win because the French government and the French people win. The person who wants to move to France because they love France so much gets to win. And so that's been my position for years. And so it's so encouraging to see that that's how the French government is treating this, to say what we care about is the French market. If you're on the French labor market offering products or services, then yeah, you do need a work authorization. If you're not, and this is the third line, then you're not fulfilling any of those criteria. So go ahead and get on the long stay visitor visa and keep on working your foreign job. There's a point we're going to circle back to where it says that also entails then, getting paid for your work abroad and filing taxes abroad. After that, then it's saying in the fourth line, how are we going to consider this? Like, what is our interpretation of this? We're going to esteem that you are non-active in terms of French law, because there's this real question of if you're sitting in France, where are you paying social charges? If your job is an American job or a UK job, are you contributing to, US pension or UK unemployment? How does that concretely work? And it's here they're saying, well, in our eyes, we're going to say that you're non-active on the French market. We're not expecting you to contribute to French social security, which is a great clarification. Lastly, it's saying, of course, the same rules still apply. You cannot be a French employee of like a French company. You cannot set up your own micro-entreprise in France or become an entrepreneur here. And that's, of course, been the rule. So let's circle back to where I thought they could have been slightly clearer in this guideline. They say, you're getting paid abroad and you are paying taxes on that abroad. The getting paid abroad, they don't really care where the money's getting paid into, whether the bank account is a French bank account or a US bank account. They really more care about, is it a US employer or a foreign employer or a French employer? That's what their focus is on. And then I think where it's really critical is the question of taxes, because if you talk with any accountant, they'll say tax residency is different from legal residency. Tax residency is where do you lay your head at night? Where are you spending more than half the calendar year? Where's your spouse located? Where do your kids go to school? Where's your job? Where is your central community? And if you're living in France for more than half the calendar year, then yes, you do want to be filing income taxes here in France. And so if you're filing income taxes in France, does that not contradict that third line of the guidelines? I think it actually ends up depending on, I think it's a nuance, and I don't think this actually really matters much or changes que ça change la donne, that it changes the outcome any. I think they're just trying to say that you're paying income tax. Because once, like, let's say you're American and you're on the Franco-American tax treaty, you can benefit from that. That says, you're going to file and declare in both countries, especially if you're an American. On the French side, there's a box to check on the French tax return that says, listen, I'm filing in France. I already had it get taken out of my US pay slip, so I'm just going to have a tax credit be on the French side. In that case, then yeah, similar to the system here in France, we've got the prélèvement à la source. You're paying your income tax directly off of your pay slip here in France. And a lot of times that's the case on the US side. And then there's some other questions that I think are some ambiguities that France needs to resolve. What's the next steps? Where do things go from here? Could there be a new law that trumps this, or a regulation that comes out somewhere that kind of says, okay, well, that's just kind of like a soft guideline, but now here's a hard and fast rule? Maybe. We'll see how politics goes. My general read is that the French legislators aren't usually thinking of the visitor visa and visitors. They're usually thinking of dual national terrorists. They're thinking of folks that are undocumented. They're trying to make it slightly harder for people to get naturalized. I usually think that's where the focus is. What about the Ministry of Finance, who has never been aligned with the Ministry of the Interior? Well, the question's already kind of been answered. So unless somebody asks a different question of the Ministry of Finance, I'm not sure how the Ministry of Finance would then react to this. And I've generally seen that within the French government, they like to save face and not contradict other branches of the French government publicly. So if the Ministry of the Interior is pronouncing itself so strongly on this matter, I would have a hard time seeing the Ministry of Finance coming right back out and contradicting that. The other thing that kind of bothers me is there's the Franco-American tax treaty has a section about it that talks about permanent establishment. If you're living here in France and you're working here in France for that non-French company, after a certain while, under that tax treaty, it says, looks and feels like you're establishing yourself permanently here in France, that employer might then have to pay French corporate taxes. They may have to pay social charges on your work here in France. I don't feel like it really addressed that question. There was that fourth line about under French law, we'll basically be considering you non-active, not actively active worker here in France. But when they drafted that, I wish they paid a little more attention to that question, under the Franco-American tax treaty. So we'll have to see where this goes from here, but I feel like this provides an immense amount of coverage for a lot of people who have told me in their emails, listen, Daniel, whatever you tell me, just give me a 100% compliant. I just want to do the thing that's the most compliant. And I have to tell them, listen, so long as there's not a law in the books about this, so long as there's no official proclamation on this matter, there's no way for you to be 100% sure, And yet now, today, I can tell people, well, look, there's now officially a guideline on this matter saying you can. And that's going to be really reassuring. And I think that's what's going to change the game. I think it's going to open up France to a lot of people who dream of France but have been having the door closed in this whole time. Is the visitor visa a good thing? I think it is, because you come into France, you're contributing to the French market, you're not taking a French job, so France is benefiting. It feels win-win. And usually when anti-immigrant folks are out there, they're not thinking about this specific group of immigrants. So we'll have to watch how the situation evolves, but I'm really happy that this came out. I'm really happy to have played a role in this, to have influenced French policy for the first time. And when I went to the deputy to talk about this, I wasn't lobbying for one thing or the other. I wasn't saying, yes, teleworking should happen on the visitor visa, or no, you should put them all on entrepreneur. I was saying, I'm lobbying for clarity. Let the government pronounce itself one way or another, but let it pronounce itself. And here today, they finally just did. And if this matters to you, if this now opens the door to you to come over here to France, let's have a conversation. Let's get you over here in France, living your best French life.